Good day, everybody. So, it's a privilege to talk to you today about our devotion as we continue to study the book of Galatians, chapter 5. We are now looking at verses 7 to 12. So, let me read it for you. Galatians 5, verses 7 to 12. You ran well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? This persuasion does not come from him who calls you. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. I have confidence in you, in the Lord, that you will have no other mind. But he who troubles you shall bear his judgment, whoever he is. And I, brethren, if I still preach circumcision, why do I still suffer persecution? Then the offense of the cross has ceased. I could wish that those who trouble you would even cut themselves off. Very powerful words from the Apostle Paul himself. As we continue to look at the book of Galatians, especially this passage, we have to bear in mind Paul's emotion and frustration as he writes this book. He was so zealous and he was so furious as he was writing this letter. Back then, letters were very expensive and not everybody could afford to write them. So when Paul wrote letters, he actually made sure they were very, very necessary for the church, for the people. So what is he saying? In verse 7, he said, you ran well. It's past tense. So he was describing the believers in Galatia as having been very good to their faith in the past. It was past tense. You ran well. You used to run well. And they did. The believers had started well in their faith. Now they had fallen off course, completely off the track. Someone or some people had caused them to go off track, to be off course. And now there's even a chance that they won't be able to carry the race at all because of that. As we all know, going back to who, Paul's ministry, he was a church planter. He planted church wherever he went. That was his passion. That was his calling. That was his ministry. And when a church has been established, he would appoint leaders and elders to be in charge of these churches, and then he would go. He doesn't stay in the one church. He goes around. And unfortunately, there were false teachers who were coming in the churches, accusing Paul that he wasn't preaching the full gospel. But for someone to be able to be saved or to have full salvation, faith is not enough. That one must do good works, be circumcised. They were so big about circumcision, and that faith alone was not enough. So Paul was furious when he learned about this. In verse 9, he says, a little leaven leavens the whole lump. In the Bible, leaven is usually referred as sin, or vice versa. Sin was often referred as leaven. And here, he was saying these false teachers were very few. There were probably a handful of them, not very many. They were able to easily destroy people's understanding of what the gospel was all about. They had completely undone Paul's work. So Paul had to act, and so he writes this letter. He was furious. He was very frustrated. Verse 10, he says, I have confidence in you, in the Lord, that you will have no other mind, but he who troubles you shall bear his judgment, whoever he is. He was condemning whoever is preaching the wrong gospel to them. He goes on to verse 11. It says, and I, brethren, if I still preach circumcision, why do I still suffer persecution? Then the offense of the cross has ceased. Here he was emphasizing the cross. He was going back to the cross, where the root of it all, the cross, the bloodshed, the sacrifice that was made on the cross. Jesus, everything would have been meaningless if all these good works, if circumcision was actually another mean of salvation, of being saved. It was as if Jesus' ministry in earth was pointless. In verse 12, here he goes, I could wish that those who trouble you would even cut themselves off. He not only condemned them in verse 10, but he actually said very blunt and very harsh words to them in verse 12. He was saying, if you are so big about this circumcision, if you're really mad about this circumcision thing, why don't you castrate yourselves off completely? Why not take it all off? Why not only take the foreskin? Why not take the full thing off? He was very serious. He was fuming as he writes this. I think our Bible translations are actually being polite in how they had worded what Paul really meant. And for us, I think Paul's zealousness, his passion in proclaiming the true gospel is one thing I think that the Lord had admired, and one of the reasons why he chose him. He was not afraid to rebuke people. He was not afraid to even argue with Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples. He wasn't afraid, as long as he knew that he was doing the right thing and he was leading people to the Lord. He was preaching the gospel, the true gospel. Thank you for your time today. Hope you had taken something from our devotion. It's an honor to talk to you today. God bless and have a good day. Bye bye.